When I was a child, I saw this picture on my father's bedside table in a book. I was fascinated by the book. I was fascinated by the story of this gang led by a guy called Lampion, who was very successful in battling down the army and everything, and wreaked absolute hell up in the north of Brazil. But he became very famous, a bit like Bonnie and Clyde. Their heads had been cut off once they'd been finally caught. And I've had this obsession with this story ever since.
Ron King is a singular artist. He's always done his own thing. He's always been an artist who's completely true to himself. The work has a range of weight, from the grand and almost monumental to the almost the miniature. He loves the book because the book is a dynamic object. He loves the book because the book always has a movement to it. A book can go one way or two ways. You can go backwards or forwards. A book has such a kind of living structure that it gives him more possibilities than the flat canvas. The book is a beautiful object, can be a beautiful object. Nobody has made books more beautifully than Ron King.
We've sold hundreds of these.
That's amazing.
And they're all tied together with a piece of string. Regrets? Oh, plenty. I suppose I have. I suppose I would have liked to have been a painter. I was born in São Paulo in Brazil. My father worked for Bank of London, South America Limited, and he met my mother in São Paulo in one of the British clubs there. The first time he met her, he was actually drunk, and her brother shooed him away. A year later, he came back and he wasn't drunk, and they got together. There was a certain amount of difficulty there because my mother was Jewish, and the Jewish family weren't that keen on having a goy. But in the end, they actually respected him a great deal. He helped them through quite a lot of difficulties they had at the time. One of the brothers committing suicide and things of that nature. It was a hard time. My father then, in the Depression, was moved to Rio, and there they settled on the poorer side of the bay called Niterói. There was quite a large British colony, and I was brought up in an English school there. But I also went to German kindergarten, funnily enough, and I learned how to speak German. I could speak Portuguese. I really didn't speak that much English to start with. And I had a French-speaking grandmother too, who used to come over and stay. So I think about the age of 4, I was sent to England with my mother to learn English properly, and came back only with English. So I had to relearn the Portuguese. And by then, the war was imminent, and my father wouldn't let me have anything to do with the German at all.
There we are, locked away. That's a self-portrait with Willow.
So these are all carved out of solid wood.
Is that the carving of yours as well?
Yeah. And I like working with lead as well. All the bandits have different masks.
Right.
And I'll work them to death. The Brazilian kids next door to me in particular, I can remember, were very good at making things out of paper. And I was quickly into that. The whole nature of the Brazilian carnival and masks and kites. To be quite honest, I think I enjoyed drawing with the scissors rather than with a pencil, you know. From there, at the age of about 8, I was sent to a British boarding school in São Paulo. Coming home from boarding school, in a moment of boredom, I remember turning round and finding this book on my father's bedside table, which had this horrendous picture of all these decapitated heads. And I was absolutely fascinated by the story of this bandit who had terrorized the north of Brazil, for good reason actually, because the land workers were treated extremely badly. They were ruled over by what they called colonels, who owned the land and who were in hand with the police. And these guys would revolt every now and then, but this one was a famous one. And they'd finally caught them, chopped their heads off. And it stayed with me because Lampion became a figure in my life. He became a sort of naughty mentor. I did kind of admire what he'd done, at the same time horrified by what he'd been as well. And it stayed with me, and I did drawings, and gradually I made etchings, and after a while made the figures which I've got, and carved all their heads from the photograph I have. I did the bandits in such a way that they are all with not very nice masks. They all look quite evil. On the other hand, across the room, they're all dead and innocent. And that's really how they really were. They were forced into that kind of thing. I have quite a socialist streak in me. I think the English society will not change as long as you have this hierarchy and this leaning towards royalty and class. I'm lucky I've changed my accent. I bet you anything if I talked in that kind of voice, I probably wouldn't be listened to in some of the museums. You know, bandits are really an example of good and evil. Mostly evil from the point of view of the bandits, but what drove them into that? What drives people to do what they do nowadays too?
We are interrupting our programs to bring you a news flash.
This is London calling. Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead.
I was sent to England the moment the war was over. Coming to England didn't help because I had a funny accent. I was half Jewish. School wasn't that easy until I'd proved myself in some way or another. I came over on this ship with my mother, so there were only 6 other boys and myself in the gunner's quarters at the back of a cargo ship full of herbs and hides, and my mother in front with the officers. The crew weren't that good to us because they saw us trooping up onto the ship, having avoided the war and going to private schools, and they knew all about that. The journey to England took 21 days, zigzagged all the way. I had a very hard time with the bosun. It was really quite horrendous what I went through with that man. He'd made a pass at my mother, and I was incensed. I think he tried, when we were out on deck once, sitting on the hold, to interfere with me, and I revolted against it very violently. And the worst thing he ever did, after I'd sworn to him, was to hang me over the side of the ship by my feet. He was a very big, strong man, which was a horrendous experience. And I never told my mother about it, but it was a horrendous nightmare, and I screamed throughout the whole night. She couldn't think what it was about, and it was about that. That was, in fact, the beginning of a lot of my resentment in England.
England is a beach, there's no escaping it. England is a beach, there is no running away from it.
This German girl who came to work for us called Ulla, and she made this book. I didn't do too much to help her. She went out and she got a whole lot of wallpaper samples, books, and printed onto them using a poem called England is a Bitch. I didn't like England when I first arrived. From the age of 13, 14 on, I was on my own. My parents weren't in England. My mother went back after she'd been in England for a few months. When I first arrived, I lived in Eastbourne with a godmother who's sweet but impoverished in her boarding house. And it was in the poorer end of town. And I can remember I didn't have too much success with the boys in the prep school because I came from the poorer end of town, and I didn't have too much success with the poorer end because I was going to this posh little prep school, getting ready to go to public school, and I found it all quite difficult. It was a very tough environment, and there was a lot of beating. I can remember a very famous racing driver called Mike Hawthorne telling me to clean his shoes, and I refused. And he said, either you clean your shoes or you bend over, and he beat me with a bat. But I still didn't clean his shoes. There was a lot of that kind of thing. I think I can even remember babysitting John Snow because his father was the headmaster. I was picked on at the beginning until I proved myself as a boxer. Didn't help me being half Jewish and coming from Brazil, but I was proud of it. And I didn't let people get away with it. And then I decided that I would prove myself and be best at everything. But I was still a bit of an outcast. At my public school, we were very lucky because there was a large hangar had been made into an art school by German prisoners. And I spent a lot of my time in it. But I didn't have much of an art background while I was in Eastbourne. Once I got to Ardingly, my art master was quite good. He introduced me to modern art, slowly introduced me to people like Cézanne and Gauguin, all that. The French painters really excited me. I wasn't particularly original. I was quite conventional, and I still am, to a certain extent, quite conventional in my imagery. But because I spent so much time, my art master, he helped me a great deal.
Did you do drama at school?
I was too self-conscious to be an actor, but I always did the scenery. I enjoyed that, and puppetry. That was one of the latest things I made. It was an idea I had from seeing this photograph. This is another idea coming up, a sort of self-portrait with a lid. and things will come out of it. I thought that might appeal to you.
Yes.
Going to art school was difficult because my father had plans for me. He wanted me to go and do architecture at McGill University in Canada for some reason. You've got some idea about that. I don't know how to say this. He wasn't exactly mean, but he was very tight. He tried to cut down my schooling by 1 year because I was quite bright and he thought that I should go ahead a year. And of course it didn't work. I did very well, but I didn't do well enough for him. And so I stayed on at my public school an extra year at A level. And by then I was getting angry. I was angry that I'd worked so hard to do what he wanted in the first place and only missed out on my maths. And he'd written me a long lecture about being lazy about not doing my maths and would I do it again at Christmas, and I refused. And from then on, I really rebelled and ended up going to art school on the condition that I would do commercial art, not fine art. Being at art school was great because it was a completely democratic sort of situation where there were people of all types there. I mean, there was quite famous people there teaching, like Robert Medley and the Welshman, Carey Richards, Trevelyan, Brian Robb. You know, you'd have different people teaching. There were some very interesting people, like Elizabeth Frink was there, and she was only a couple of years ahead of us and very friendly. You know, I've got one of her pieces up there. When it came to the third year, I remember the principal of the art school saying to me, which you want to do? And I said, painting, but my father doesn't want me to do that. He said, oh, well, we'll get over that. We'll put you in painting. You know, I'll say anything you want me to say. And I did. I went into the painting department. My father discovered that I was painting and not doing a purely commercial thing and threatened to cut me off completely from the amount of money he sent over. I actually went to great pains to get myself in for a major county award on the pretext that I wouldn't have any way of staying at art school otherwise. And I got it, but my father wouldn't sign the papers. But luckily, it came to light that if he didn't have me to support in a course in England, he wouldn't be allowed to send any money from Brazil. So I then stood my ground and said, no, if you don't go on supporting me and won't sign my papers, you won't be able to send any money to England. And of course, he was sending more than was needed to keep me at art school. And he was saving money on the side for himself. So in the end, I came out all right, and he did see me through art school and began to actually be quite supportive of what I was doing as a painter. He himself would have liked to have been something like that. He did watercolors and drawings and things of that nature, and I still have some of them. There's a steel alphabet there. We have limited it to an edition of 5. So the first one I sold, and with the money from that, I had a second one made. And that's been made piece by piece, eh?
Wow.
And then welded together. And that's mounted on wood, on a red, or well, on ply. We met in 1951. been together through thick and thin ever since. Quite a lot of thick at times, and plenty of thin. It's a good studio, this one. The whole place is shared between us. Her own self-portrait, which went round England on a woman's self-portrait exhibition. There's our youngest son. That's our second son, one who became very religious. That's the oldest son. She's very, very good at portrait heads. You can see the studies she's made for this, and all the drawings too. This is what she does. Every Tuesday she goes off and does life drawing. And this is one of her favourite models. She likes nice, big, bulky men. God knows why she picked me. I couldn't stay in England because Willow and I had got married by then. I was due for military service in Brazil and I was due for military service in England. So that's why we shot off to Canada. Willow got a job in the same store that I finally got a job in. It was like a sort of mini Harrods. It was called Simpsons. But I didn't work too long. I was taken on by a magazine called Maclean's. Maclean Hunter Publications, very large magazine, publishers in Toronto. And within weeks, they'd taught me what I had to do. And within months, I was doing layouts for the magazines. From then, things got much better. And we moved into a very, very lovely little house on the edge of a Toronto ravine. And I started painting and selling paintings, as well as doing my job. At one point, they were about to lay me off because there was a recession. And I tried to go into the States and get myself a job, except my father wouldn't give me the £1,000 I needed. And he says, no, we're moving to England soon, we need all our money. But that was good for me. And when I came back, they put me into another section. The man who ran the department didn't like me at all, gave me a hard time, but it taught me a great deal. And later on, when there was an opening for the art directorship of Canadian Homes and Gardens, he applied for it, I applied for it, and I got it. And I had a wonderful time. I wanted to redesign the magazine, and I was told that they were getting in a consultant from New York. The consultant consulted me as to what I wanted to do and said, oh, I think that's great. I'll take you back to New York. We'll do it together. And we redesigned the whole magazine. I was art director of that magazine. I set up the camera, and Peter Varley took them on 4x5. I had 2 years on a very low budget, working for this magazine. And I got on very well with the staff there. And we did wonderful things. If we ran out of money for drawings, I would do them and sign them under another name.
So it sounds like a time of great ease for you.
Liberation.
Liberation.
Yes. I don't think it was too easy, but I found that I could do lots of things. You know, and I learnt about photography. I did illustrations for other people, and my painting was appreciated. I even won a couple of awards. We had 3 boys while we were there, and then Willow wanted to come back, try England. Later, at the Toronto Art Gallery, I was awarded a prize too for one of the paintings, Willow in a Bath, a very, very Bonnardish painting. And a gallery took interest in me and said, we'll give you a one-man show. So it seemed like a good reason to come back to England and paint for a year. When I wanted to leave, they nearly doubled my salary. And I said, no, you could have done this before, thank you very much. he came back with the 3 boys, and that was the attraction. I thought, wow, we've got enough money, we've saved enough money. I can go back and paint for a year. But 3/4 of the way through that year, Willow's brother got killed in a car accident, and no way was she going to go back to Canada. Decided I'd take my show over to Toronto, but I would come back. But I went back to Canada with all the paintings I'd done, and it was good. It was a success. I sold most of them. I lost complete confidence in painting when I came back to England, actually. I found it difficult, found it quite difficult to paint. And I went through quite a lot of stilted sort of starts to try and paint. After I'd painted for the show, I tried getting myself into galleries in London. They weren't interested at all. And I became depressed about the painting, actually. By then I was thinking, you know, perhaps I'm not a painter. I couldn't find exhibitions that want my work. I couldn't find dealers who would want to buy my work, and took up silkscreen printing, doing monoprints and things. I don't know why I quite gave up painting then, but I never painted with the same kind of drive again, but I found printmaking quite interesting. Running out of money, and so I took on a teaching job at Farnham School of Art. I left Farnham because they cut the foundation course, or were going to 1 year, and I completely disagreed with their logic about it. We were losing students, and I left and I went freelance again. And I've been introduced to silkscreening. It's a Polish man who ran the silkscreen printing at Farnham. I spent about £12, and he sold me a whole lot of silkscreen equipment, which I put in the bedroom which I worked in. And I started screen printing monoprints. And then a lecturer who saw some of these monoprints came to me and said, "Would you like to edition some of these?" And I was hired by a lecturer to turn out quite a lot of prints, which I did. But when I proposed a book, they weren't so interested. I'd seen the books at the V&A by Matisse and Picasso and people like that, and that really stirred me up. I thought, I'm going to make a book. I wanted to do books. I liked the idea of being able to control something from beginning to end in one go, whereas I was doing separate editions for them. I also liked the idea of the text and image. I said I wanted to do a book, and they said, no, we don't do books. Here's the prologue. But they said you can only do the book if for each image, and there were 14 images in the book, you do another 50 separate prints that we can sell on our own. So it was an enormous project, and I held them to their contract in a sense, but they held me to a pitiful payout for what I was going to do. That was the Chaucer prologue. And then they had a squabble inside the lecture, and they kind of split up. I'd done all the books by then, delivered them, and my solicitor said, quick, get them out, because if they go broke, you won't get any of your £3,000 or £4,000 or whatever they still owe me. And I did. Edition lecture stamped every single book, and then they couldn't pay me. So it was impossible. And in the end, they weren't able to publish it, so I took it out and sold it myself. And these were all cut out of paper stencils, and these are all the pilgrims. Wife of Bath, the Friar, Franklin. They were based on African masks, and also had the cross symbol from heraldry in a lot of them too. That was the last print, Chaucer himself.
The other great thing about Ron King is that he has always worked collaboratively. He's always been a marvelous worker with other artists and an enabler, someone who makes other artists creative, helps them to be creative in new ways.
When I was kicked out of Elector, as it were, or I left Elector and started selling the books and the prints, and got a few friends of mine to join me in forming what was called Circle Press, a mutual group of people interested in making books. And that's how we started. That's where I met Ian Tyson. Ian Tyson was very much my mentor poetically and text-wise. It's a bit like shouting. You get, if you're in a rocky place, you get an echo back. I needed other people to bounce things off. And as much as they learned from me, I would learn from them. It was very rarely that you didn't get something back.
I think Ron's approach to the work at Circle Press in a way reflected his own approach to things. I mean, he wasn't very absolutely one-dimensional about his route. He can be obsessional about things like for instance, the Bandits. That has always been throughout his life. That's recurred and come back. But he was very open to other people's work, and I think that's reflected in the output of the press, and probably is a bit confusing to people, because it's got such a range of different sorts of work in it, all produced to a very high standard, but the subject matter goes right across every genre in a way. I think that's probably might be why he's not as well known as he should be. I think in this country, in England, people don't like that very much. They like you to do one thing. So you're either mucking about as a cameraman and being an artist, or you're being a cameraman and mucking about as an artist. You can't be both things. You can't be so serious about everything. And that's just not true. I mean, all those things feed in, everything feeds into itself. And I think, a prime example of that is Ron, really. And he was not only following all those different avenues in his own work, but he was letting it come into the press as well. The press was as diverse as his work as well. That's why he was open to that and encouraged people. He seems to be more welcomed in the States.
The first book I published at Circle Press couldn't sell them very well in England, so I took a trip to the States. And there it went well. The Chaucer went really quite well, so that became our main market. The business of selling, well, books weren't that reachable, the type of thing that I was doing in the States. And they'd never seen anything like that before, And yet Americans were very receptive. I'd buy a ticket that would take us to 21 cities or something, and fly from place to place, pick up a phone, say, I've been given your name as a possible source of interest for the things that I do. I run a private press in London. Would you like to see it? I've got, maybe the work of about 10, 12 artists to show, and I'd turn up and show them the stuff. I can't remember anyone ever saying to me, oh, bugger off, don't know who you are, what you are. And the Americans went for it. That's a head I did of a printer called Ken Campbell. The front part of it is just beaten out of lead, and it's hollow inside. The back is cast in clay, and because it cracked, I left it cracked because I always maintained he was cracked in a friendly way. And because he's a typographer and printer, bookmaker, I pressed letters into the wet clay. I helped him get going in the States, gave him a whole lot of addresses. The next book was Ian Tyson's I've always been quite Catholic in my taste. As long as someone came up with a good book idea, I didn't care whether it was representational or abstract or whatever. As long as it was a good book idea and it was likely to be something which had integrity to it, I was quite happy to do it. There are many people whose work I wasn't keen on would come to me and I would help them with their first book, but I wouldn't include them into Circle Press. You know the Bartók opera,
Yes.
Bluebeard's Castle?
Yes.
The idea came to me to do this after I'd seen a pop-up book in New York, which I bought from one of my kids, Pinocchio. And I thought, oh, that's the thing. Let's make a modern pop-up book with quite way out stuff. We became one of the first presses to do everything ourselves. We weren't getting other people to print our books. We were actually printing them ourselves. And if we couldn't print, then we didn't do it, more or less. You can blow it round. We did a big one like this for the V&A show, and I nearly got thrown out of the V&A for blowing it. I said, that's mine, I can do what I like with it. No, sir, you can't do that. I bought a press and started letterpressing, and I found that not that difficult. And around that time, found out that my family had been in printing since 1735. And I didn't know anything about it. And one of my major works is a box with 7 drawers in it, which celebrates the 7 generations which printed. That's a story in itself, because in Germany, I was given a box with type, which my grandfather had set, of wooden type. And so I used it as the basis for this. There's 7 drawers. First 3 generations, next 3 generations. I think I made 56 of these. And each of them has a one-off at the back with the same poem in it. And they've got poems by Roy Fisher. Picture of my family printing. That's my grandfather. That's his brother. And that's my great-grandfather. I had this line of printers who were doing really well. My great-grandfather used to buy in books from London, which people had never seen before, and bind them. Did big business, and they're good, wealthy printers. But my grandfather broke away from them and started his own company in London, Richard Edward King, and printed classics very cheaply and did very well, formed a company, and everything went wrong after that. It's called Tabernacle because my grandfather, who was a bit of a bad lot, although he was very successful in London, also went bust in the end and ended up in debtor's jail and deserted my father and his mother, so that my father knew nothing about the printing side of the family at all. We only found it out much later. And he was the only one who wasn't involved in printing.
Ron King chose to work and has done most of his work in a field that has limited commercial and critical appeal. He's one of the people who actually, by making books and artists' books and using the book particularly as a kind of medium for artistic expression and the making of very, very specific and special kinds of image that couldn't be done in any other way, he actually has been one of those people who has brought about a change in that attitude. His work is marked always, I think, by wit, ingenuity, and a tremendous feeling for whatever it is that his themes are in any particular moment. He works with enormous knowledge of a range of cultures, always finding something fresh and exciting in a particular kind of cultural situation or mode.
I can't think of any book which was mine completely, which didn't have a narrative side to it. I mean, the Bluebeard's Castle, that was my breakaway from the printing of text and image together in that sense. It was actual construction, and it was a stage set, it was storytelling. In 1971-72, as I finished the design for Bluebeard's Castle, my first son died. I couldn't paint after that. I finished the Bluebeard's Castle and then went through a stage where I didn't produce anything very much for a while.
How old was your son?
15 and a half. And it was very, very quick, packing stuff. I'd done my back in preparation for an exhibition in Washington, went into the bathroom, tried to shave, collapsed. People up the road came and hoiked me onto my bed somehow or other. And I'd called my son down from upstairs. He lay down next to me on the bed. And I said, "Why are you away from..." "Why are you away from school?" He said, I'm not feeling well, I've got this lump in my leg. So when the doctor came and he injected me so they could get me into an ambulance, I said to the doctor, "Have a look at Danny." When I woke up in hospital, Willow said, "Danny's there too. He's got cancer. Had a tumour." And it was quick. Within 3 months, he was dead. Spread that wild. When my first son died, I found he had a fantastic collection of penny blues, penny blacks, penny reds. And so I used it to sort of, as a memorial thing to him. They're all monoprints stuck in. They've all been printed. And I did a whole series of these, black, red, blue, celebrate him with little pictures of him here and there. And us in all this one, but some of them just with pictures of him. It was very difficult. He came home, it was Christmas time, came down from his room, I think it was 28th of December, that he was looking at some stamps and he just put down things, lay down. That was very hard. He'd be 60. His brother got the same cancer. Years and years later, could have been cured. Was with Jesus and thought Jesus would heal him. He didn't when he was 45. He was very close. That changed our lives quite a bit. We moved from Guildford to London.
Okay.
And that's quite important because when I moved from Guildford to London is when we first made a lot of money. And we bought a flat, Swiss Cottage. I bought a workshop in All Saints Road in Notting Hill, in the worst drug road in London.
Oh, that's where you made your money.
Well, I could have. Definitely the police wanted to come into my press and watch the road, and I refused. I said, "Do you want me dead next day?" And by that time also I'd got John Christie printing with me. He was a cameraman. He worked for the BBC, and he was always very interested in graphic arts, painting and things of that nature. And somehow he got interested in books, I think mainly through going to the Coracle Press in Camberwell, exhibitions there, and found some of our books. Contacted Ian Tyson, and he went to Ian. Ian said, "No, I don't want that book that you want to do, but Ron might." And he joined me. I said, "Yes, I'll do that book if you'll learn how to print with me and do it yourself." In no time I knew he could be better than I at printing. He's super, very, very, and great friend, great friend.
On that first meeting with Ron, and then subsequent the weeks that we worked together making that first book, Listen, because the workshop itself was a place that was completely full of possibilities for me. Ron, he would never say, "I don't like that." If you show him something, or "I would like to make a book of that," or "I'd like to do such and such," he would be quite encouraging. And so if the thing developed into actually producing a book, he would really generously actually finance the thing himself, but he was just very encouraging. I would come to the studio. I'd quite often help Ron if he was doing something. I'd also learn how to do some technique or whatever. I'd watch him and he'd show me how to do it. And so it was always up to me in a way to come up with what I wanted to do. Ron's put an incredible amount of effort into other people's work, really, and not always, I don't think, fully appreciated or thanked for it.
I'd been asked to do something for the outside of the British Library, and we did 1 metre square show cases which hung all round the hoarding of the British Library, and people like Tom Phillips did it, and Mark Vaux, and 2 or 3 famous people. That led to some interest, and we booked a show at the theatre on the South Bank, and I did a very large piece actually for it called The Echo, and we had the biggest show we've ever had. Didn't get any write-ups at all except in Time Out. And it was a piece about that long. I was 13,000 quid in the red. It was the first time I'd really been caught. We had 2 sort of opening nights, and in the second one, this lady came up to me called Elizabeth Fairman, and she was the librarian for the Yale Center for British Art. She said, "Oh, we've got 1 or 2 of your things. When you come to the States again, come and see me." So that was about the biggest break we had. So I went out to the East Coast again. And ended up in Yale Center for British Art. And I remember walking in and thinking, wow, what a place. And we decided that perhaps the whole collection should go there. Everything. And the understanding was that they would buy everything I had and they would get the archives free. But it would be in the name of my first son. It was such an achievement in some ways to get the whole of the press's work into a great collection on condition that they called the archives the Daniel King Archive Collection. We gave them everything, and we didn't give them the portrait though. They shipped over everything. Even some of the Bandits came over. Super show. And at that point I decided, well, done enough publishing now. Straighten up. Straighten up. We had a press which had turned out the work of many different artists. It wasn't all one thing or one speciality. It was a very varied collection of stuff by a lot of different people, a lot of different poets. I mean, there were, you know, about 200 people involved in the end. I don't think I would have become a good painter, so possibly the events that made me into a bookmaker were fortuitous. I've been very lucky in my own way. I've been successful, I suppose, and helped quite a lot of people along to do the same kind of things. Life has been quite exciting at times and dramatic at other times, and it would have made a good story. And I suppose I feel that way too about the books. You've got to contribute even though you may not be tops. You know, you're supporting other things.
He's in a long and grand tradition, but he's never overawed by it, and he's never been constrained by it. A lot of people who make books or love printing tend to be a little bit narrow in their concerns. They tend to be proscriptive of others and prescriptive in their own work. King has never been that. He's always been free to do what he felt like doing or what he saw was a possibility. His work is always fresh, it's always direct. He loves complication when complication is illuminating, and he loves simplicity when simplicity throws light. The book is a beautiful object, can be a beautiful object. Nobody has made books more beautifully than Ron King.